So now we come to the trinity of preeminent Stoic philosophers. The first is Epictetus. He's a Greek philosopher who was born as a slave in Hierapolis, present-day Turkey. And he lived in Rome until his banishment. Epictetus obtained his freedom sometime after the death of Nero in AD 68, and he began to teach philosophy in Rome. And around 93 AD, when Emperor Domitian had banished all philosophers from the city, Epictetus moved to Nicopolis in Greece, and there he founded his own school of philosophy. His teachings were written down and published by his pupil Arian, and those include the Discourses and the Enchiridion. Epictetus taught that philosophy is a way of life and not just a theoretical discipline. To Epictetus, all external events are beyond our control. We should accept whatever happens calmly and indifferently. However, individuals are responsible for their own actions, which they can examine and control through rigorous self-discipline. Now, early in his life, Epictetus acquired a passion for philosophy, and with the permission of his wealthy owner, he studied Stoic philosophy under Musonius Rufus. And becoming more educated in this way raised his social status. But at some point, he became crippled. Sources claim that this was because his leg had been deliberately broken by his owner, or some sources claim that he had simply been like this from childhood. Epictetus not only became a chief proselytizer of Stoicism, the experiential knowledge he had gained throughout his life due to hardship, misfortune, circumstances meant that he was like a living proof, an embodiment that served to corroborate the principles that he espoused. For instance, central to the Stoics was their belief that we as humans should live in accordance with nature. And this idea encompassed a lot, but essentially the idea of virtue for one. This principle also applies to the realm of interpersonal relationships. Epictetus once said, "Be free from anger, envy, and jealousy, and to accept even slaves as equals of other men, because all men alike are products of nature." Now, as I mentioned, Epictetus was a former slave himself, who achieved emancipation through his sheer will of determination. His scholarly endeavors and perseverance resulted in him being recognized for his intellectual capabilities, his virtue, and his moral conviction. And thus this resulted in him achieving the recognition he deserved and an elevated stature in Roman society. Now, of course, to our contemporary minds, this might seem like a very obvious and ethical stance to take, but you have to view it through the lens of the time. In first century Rome, the practice of slavery was ubiquitous throughout almost every part of the known world. So this egalitarianism that Epictetus was promoting was kind of a revolutionary and bold thing for him to say. But once again, he was living proof of his own point, which probably served to add credence to the Stoic beliefs that he espoused. Now, both the Discourses and the Enchiridion began by distinguishing between those things that are in our power and those things that are not. That which is in our power consists of our opinions, our impulses, desires, and aversions. Now, on the contrary, what is not in our power are our bodies, possessions, glory, and power. Any delusion on this point leads to the greatest errors and misfortunes and to the slavery of the soul, according to Epictetus. We have no power over external things, and the good that ought to be the object of our earnest pursuit is to be found only within ourselves. The determination between what is good and what is not good is made by the capacity for choice. Choice allows us to act and gives us the kind of freedom that only rational animals have. It is determined by our reason, which, of all of our faculties, sees and tests itself and everything else.
Got it going.
Sorry, I just had to mute one of the microphones there. Okay. So essentially, this concept has become known as the dichotomy of control. And this slide might help to summarize what is meant by that. You'll find very similar articulations of this concept presented frequently in psychology texts. The Stoics acknowledge that people don't have control over all or even much of what happens in life. And they emphasize that worrying about things outside of their control is simply unproductive or even irrational to a person who wants to attain a sense of tranquility. Now, the Stoics would have us remind ourselves daily to actively differentiate between what is and what is not under our control, and not to waste energy over uncontrollable adverse events. Where many people worry endlessly about things that are out of their control, the Stoics think their energy is best spent thinking of creative solutions to problems rather than the issues themselves. Now, this is undoubtedly easier said than done, I hear you say, but it is a habit that takes time and persistence to cultivate. The incorporation of Stoic precepts such as this are absolutely central to the prominent theories that were developed in 20th century psychology. And I'm referring in particular to the work of Albert Ellis, who developed rational emotive behavioral therapy, which then later evolved into cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. And this is perhaps to this day the single most effective and commonly used technique in the treatment of an array of mild to moderate mental health disorders. So you could be right in assuming that this outlook requires of you a profoundly strong will, and if you were to be cynical, a high degree of self-delusion as well. But the Stoics would argue that perhaps it is a necessary self-delusion in the interests of cultivating a mindset that can help us accept our human condition and survive the vicissitudes of life. Now, the Stoic approach seeks to utilize the apparatus of our physical and non-physical selves, our mind and body, to our advantage for self-preservation, and in adherence to a way of life that seems self-evident to pursue for good relations with others.